Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. In this episode, I am joined by Valerie Bince-Stuart, who is the founder of Vimy House. It's so nice to see you, Valerie, and have the opportunity to talk about a monument that I think is so profound, a World War I monument. We're going to get into talking in this episode today about Vimy. And this particular monument, as I was saying before we started recording, I always feel uncomfortable saying I think it's one of the best monuments because it's so difficult to place a monument to suffering and catastrophe and war and devastation in a category of best. But I'm always looking for people who have personal experiences to share about Vimy. And one of the reasons that I am interested to hear your perspective is because you're a Canadian now living in France. You have a lot of different initiatives that you've been involved in around Vimy.
Yes.
And I just published this book, Pilgrimages to the Western Front of World War I, edited along with Stefan Michonneau and Frank. We have a chapter in the book about Vimy, which is written by a Franco-Canadian scholar, Mourad Jababla. And I'm hoping that this reaches French readers, and I also want to reach English speakers and readers with the story about Vimy and why it continues to be a place of pilgrimage. One of the aspects about Vimy that I completely love is that it's never stopped being a place of pilgrimage, and the
Never.
Canadians have never called it anything other than a pilgrimage site. And many of the programs that are focused, the youth programs, refer to the young people as pilgrims. And so I guess before I start going off just on a monologue, I'd love to hear who you are and a bit about your background and what drew you to Vimy in so many different ways, and what drew you to now reside in France.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. I completely agree with you that it's a very special place, and it continues to resonate with people today. The very first pilgrims, if you wish, in 1936 were the 6,000 Canadian veterans and mothers who came over for the inauguration, but it has continued to play an important part of Canadian history and Canadian consciousness. It's part of our story, and it's the biggest First World War story that we tell each other, even though that is perhaps contested by historians, its place in history. But we can get into that later. But no, I agree with you. It's a beautiful, beautiful, exquisite, iconic monument. It's an amazing work of art. It's an impressive and emotional and gripping memorial in itself. And of course, where it is geographically on the ridge with this beautiful view of the Douai Plain and the hills in Belgium, the objective, if you will, it never ceases to speak to people, to resonate with them. And I think that when people come here, they're coming, even if they're local, if they're from Belgium, if they're American like you, if they're Canadian on a pilgrimage, it doesn't really matter who you are. You never leave Vimy without taking home something with you. It remains with you. And especially because of the landscape as well, which is, of course, still showing the scars of battle. So it's this very complex place that's a living landscape that's become a beautiful park. Yes, it's a lot of different things. So about me, so my name is Valerie Bince-Stuart. I'm originally from British Columbia, Vancouver in Canada, and I've lived here for 25 years. A lot of people ask me, what were you doing here? Well, I just followed my heart. I fell in love with a Frenchman. We got married, and his parents happened to live at the foot of Vimy Ridge.
Wow.
And that is really how I became involved, because we would have these, when my children were very young, we would have these long traditional Sunday lunches. And then after lunch, we would go walk it off. And where would we go walk? Like most of the people here on Sunday afternoons, we would go walk in the Vimy Memorial Park. And I remember thinking at the time, um, how, of course, beautiful it was, and how sad and tragic it was, and how I needed to learn more. And why was I the only? I found it very incongruous that I was the only Canadian walking around on Sunday afternoon. And it spoke to me. I was like, well, that you need to do something about that. There need to be more people here. Why aren't more Canadians experiencing what you are? Um, and I guess that was the root of it. Although I also grew up in a family where Remembrance Day and rituals around remembrance were very much ingrained in our culture. And we always went to Remembrance Day ceremonies. I always looked forward to the veterans coming into school and distributing poppies for a donation. Um, we have family who participated in the First World War and the Second World War as well, family members who served, family members who died. That was largely unspoken. And we can also get into that later about the
Hmm.
pilgrims that our family underwent. But I think we carry things from generation to generation, and things that are unspoken, things that are felt, things that are held. And I think that my ending up here in this place um, provoked me to kind of question all of that and to see where my place was, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I've heard this from other Canadians who visit Vimy. There is a sense of um, understanding one's place, and that's a pretty powerful sentiment to occur at a war memorial.
Hmm.
Um, for those people who don't know what Vimy is, can you give a bit of an overview about where it is in France and what it looks like? And the image behind you is
Sure.
an iconic image that's part of the memorial. It would be helpful to orient listeners and viewers to the memorial that we're talking about.
Okay, sure. So Vimy is located in the north of France, in Hauts-de-France. You can get here, probably the easiest way to get here if you're coming from North America is by TGV train from the North Paris train station. Takes 1 hour, and it's a short 15-minute car ride. It's a ridge that's 6 kilometers long, that was fought on by the Canadian Corps in April of 1917. And the park itself is 110 hectares, so it's very large. It's operated by and maintained by Veterans Affairs Canada, and it's divided into different parts. So there's the part that you see behind me, which is the memorial and the monument. I'll explain that in a minute. There's a part that is forest that the public can go around but not into, for various reasons related to preservation and also First World War munitions and things like that. And then there's also a visitor center with trenches and tunnels that you can visit with student guides who are employed by Veterans Affairs Canada. So the memorial itself was inaugurated in 1936. It took 12 years to build. And as you see behind me, there's this beautiful, beautiful statue of Mother Canada, also known as Canada Bereft, um, based on the figure of Mary by Michelangelo. And what you can see in front of her is the Douai Plain. So that is the objective that the British with the Canadians were fighting toward. Um, the objective being to get to Belgium and to liberate the north of France and Belgium. But she's actually not looking toward the objective, even though she is victorious, because the Canadians were victorious in their capture of Vimy Ridge. She is looking down. There's a tomb below. It's empty. It's symbolic. But she's looking down at her fallen sons. So it's very much it's a figure of mourning. She's very beautiful. The all of there are many sculptures. They're also behind. There are two big columns, one representing Canada, one representing France. All along there is a base along with a wall of 11,285 names of Canadians who fought in France in the First World War, but who have no known grave. So it's our national memorial. And then you have lots of allegorical figures relating to truth, justice, those kinds of virtues. You have a beautiful sculpture of the spirit of sacrifice, which is inspired by the In Flanders Fields poem by John McCrae. And it's a monument that is very interactive, if I may say so, because you have to climb up. It's not accessible at all, unfortunately. You have to climb up many steps to get to this big plinth, which is all, and then you can walk all around it, and you have to hold your head up high, and the steps are very, very wide and tall, and you have to make an effort, and you have to search for a name. It's not very easy to find a name, even though they are in alphabetical order and then in order of rank, but there are so many. You can't separate the individual sacrifice of perhaps your family member from the greater story, because there are just simply so many names. It reminds me a little bit of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington that way, or even the Ring of Remembrance at Notre Dame de Lorette that way, is that you can't separate your personal story from the rest. I guess that's in a nutshell. But you can only see one part of it here, but she is perhaps the part that strikes a chord most with people and brings the most emotion.
I think the entire setting is awe-inspiring. I've
Yes.
walked and approached the monument itself from many different angles, but the one that I appreciate the most is from the plane,
Mm-hmm.
looking up. As a visitor or a pilgrim, I think the experience, I felt so small. I felt
Yes.
so insignificant under the weight of this monument, which I think provoked a lot of thought around
Mm.
the magnitude of loss in this area and how much this must have impacted the Canadian psyche, uh,
Yes.
throughout the 20th century, which I would like to ask you more about. Um, the the other element that I find powerful about this monument is the focus on the family sacrifice, because in the form of the mother.
Mm.
I think the there is not a sense of victory.
No.
Even though this may have been a victory, the sense that I have had is that this is, that this loss was not only felt from a military standpoint, but from a personal familial standpoint, and seeing the mother mourning, it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, you mentioned the names, and also this is Canadian history, but it's actually bigger than Canadian history. Even if I bring in a bit of US history, there were thousands of young men from where I live in New England that went back to Canada. They may have migrated and then went back, and they were part of the expeditionary force.
Of course,
And
yes.
so there are names that are from New England on the monument, and I suspect that this is the case for many places in the world. I just happen to have looked into this specific dimension.
Yes, of course. So of course, men from all over the world. Um, a great part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force was made up of British, for example, especially
Mhm.
in the first few years.
Yes.
Well, first few years, my own great grandfather was a British immigrant who actually tried to sign up in 1914 and got all the way to Valcartier, Quebec for his training and was sent home because his wife refused to give him permission. But then he ended up going in 1916. So that's a family story as well. He lost his brother over Arras, and then he lost his son in the Second World War. So those are things that my family never talked about. But your question about the where it holds in the Canadian psyche and how sad it is. It's actually a very interesting place, Vimy, because you do have this huge feeling of grief and sacrifice. But you also have, I mean, people all experience it all in very individual ways. Some people might feel that grief. They might feel that loss, that overpowering loss. Some people might be really in shock by the landscape that they see, which is surrounds the monument, which is still full of shell holes, and there are crater holes from underground mine explosions. Some people might come there, and even if their family name is on the memorial, maybe they feel a huge sense of pride for having contributed to
Mhm.
capturing this ridge, or having been in the Canadian Expeditionary Force, or having contributed to this greater story of Canada's coming of age. So it's all very different, but it is a story that you can also have all of those emotions, or maybe you don't have any emotions at all, and that's okay. People all experience it all very differently, and some people feel very differently after they go home. So, but it is a story that has been carried through Canada from the very beginning. Um, in 1921, when the Canadian Prime Minister announced that it was Vimy Ridge that was going to be the site of this memorial, he talked about hallowed ground and um, Earth's altar, and there are all of these religious references as well that go into Vimy. And then for the Canadian centenary, you have these really famous quotes where they talk about the Brigadier Ross and Lieutenant Clark talking about men from standing shoulder to shoulder from British Columbia, Alberta, all the way to the Maritimes, of course. So it's a very interesting place in the Canadian psyche. Um, it's also, as you said, it's always been a site of pilgrimage, simply because even though there are many other memorials in Belgium and in France for Canada, and there are many other places where Canada fought, this is the place where the memorial stands. This is the place where the memorial looks out on the landscape. This is the park that has been maintained by Veterans Affairs Canada over time. And so this is the place we go to. This is the place we have chosen that we will remember.
I do have a question around the focus on pilgrimage. Many, if not all, of the memorials and monuments that were established in the 1920s and 1930s in some form were referred to as pilgrimage sites, and the religious language is really interesting to me, and I've been talking about that on this podcast with several people. The language in the speeches and the
Mm-hmm.
dedication speeches, hallowed ground, altar, as you just talked about. Do you have any ideas around why the pilgrimage focus remained all the way through to 2026, when the idea of pilgrimage, or the idea that people are pilgrims, sort of dropped off
Mm-hmm.
in mass after World War II? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about why pilgrimage remained at the fore for the Canadians.
Well, I can certainly speak to why it remains at the fore now.
Okay.
After World War II, I'm not sure that's really my area of expertise, but I would say that perhaps it's also like the British or the Australians, also the Commonwealth countries. The men never came home. It was decided that men would be buried where they fell, where they died, and so you have an emptiness. You have a desire, I guess, or just I think families need closure. And so to some extent, closure happens when you take that pilgrimage, where you mentioned it in one of your other podcasts, um, how it's very important for people even to come and see, where did he die, where did he fall, where was he wounded, where did she serve, in which hospital. Why is that? There's something to do. My own family did it when we went to Sicily to see where my great uncle um, died and is buried. We went to the very spot with a historian to see where it happened. And at the time, I don't think I could have told you why that was important. I know it was very important for my mother, who had done a lot of research over the years about her uncle. Um, and but I was much younger. But um, I do think that there comes some sense of peace in knowing what happened, even if you actually never met the ancestor. I don't really know how to explain it. It's
Well,
in the human psyche, I think.
the idea of emptiness, I appreciate that you chose that word I do think that when there is a death of a family member and there isn't a grave to visit locally, it does leave like this. The psychological toll is that it's like, oh, they're out there, they're everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. I use that phrase a lot.
Hmm.
And going to the exact place does close this. It fills a void, but I think it's more than that. So the
I think it's an
emptiness is
emotional
something.
wound. It's like an
Mm,
emotional wound that the family carries.
yeah.
And until you can do that, not of course not everyone can. It's also becoming a pilgrim is also an investment. I'd like to say it. It's, coming from America, coming from Canada, coming from Australia, even coming from the UK. It's an investment. You have to invest in your time. You have to invest in a bit of research. You have to invest financially. So it's not a decision that's taken lightly. So I think in order to do that, you have to have you must be searching for some kind of connection or some closure or just maybe even some understanding.
Yes, I think as humans, we don't like ambiguity. We don't like a looming question. We wanna solve puzzles, and we wanna make sense and make meaning of fragmented pieces of our history and our narratives. It seems I've spent a lot of time in France over the past, several years, and it seems that there is a growing interest in Vimy,
Mm.
and I'm curious if this is a resurgence, if it has been steadily growing over time, or if there was a moment in time that really seems to be the catalyst for the visits and programs and pilgrimages that are currently happening.
So it's a very good question. And I'd just like to go back to the introduction when you were asking me how I got involved. One of the reasons why I got involved in Remembrance is because I did feel like I was I mean, obviously there was Veterans Affairs Canada working at the site, but I really did feel like I was all alone as a Canadian here. And I thought that something should be done. There were so many British school groups who were coming, for example. And obviously the French live in this landscape every day. So they're more than aware and they carry the torch very high and with lots of community initiatives, regional initiatives, national initiatives. I think that well that's how I got involved and we created Le Coquelicot following in their footsteps and we got involved in community projects and international projects with Canada. But for me, it was really the centenary of the First World War that sparked this renaissance. And perhaps before that, the 90th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and there was also the Great Restoration Program of the memorial, which took 3 years. And I think that sparked interest in Canada. It got quite a lot of media attention.
When
And
was
then
that?
knowing
When was the
um,
restoration?
2007,
Okay.
yeah. And so, and then you had like 10 years later, the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. So I think that those key dates kind of whenever you have a big anniversary, it tends to pop back up in people's minds, people's interest in the media, in schools. And of course, there are so many educational initiatives and educational programming. And even in France, national programming, la Mission de la Centenaire à la Grande Guerre, that came out of it, that I feel like everyone was involved, not just Canadians, but everyone came together to participate, to learn, to give, to share, to remember, um, whether they be scholars or students or people in the community, no matter who they were. There was a very, very heavy interest in the centenary period, so much that after 2018, it kind of just bloop to some extent. And then, of course, there was COVID. Um, but now where people are interested again. I think locally people were so heavily invested that at the end of the centenary period that they felt that it was time for them to give to other projects. Um, but the great investment and devotion that the local communities have in Artois, not just
Right.
for Vimy, but for the whole Artois landscape, the whole First World War, Battle of Arras, Battle d'Artois, is very remarkable. And there's an upsurge in community programming, in educational awareness, in remembrance tourism. It has really changed from when I first lived here.
Hmm. And Vimy is on the UNESCO list for the funerary
Yes.
sites. Yes, so I imagine that this momentum that peaked in 2018 and sort of dipped a bit because of the pandemic is slowly starting to grow and will grow exponentially with all of the education initiatives
Mhm.
that will be happening around these sites. W- what has it been like for you to lead other Canadians to Vimy?
Oh, it's been such a privilege. So there are a lot of different kinds of Canadians I have led to Vimy. There have been students. There have been presidents of businesses and CEOs, um, families searching for their past,
Mhm.
um, and then people just who are curious. And what I have found, no matter who they are, I mean, you always have the story. So we recount the history, we give them the figures, we explain the battle, we show them the maps, we explain what happened. I'm not sure that that's the most important part. I think the most important part is their realization and the profound impact that they feel upon experiencing the site. It's how the landscape connects with them, I think. And I think it's very important no matter who you are. And students say it all the time. The high school students, they'll always say, "Oh, I could never have learned this in a history book." Right? sorry,
It's
sorry,
true.
teachers, but
They're right.
yeah, but it's. I think it's when you're there and you're in a small cemetery and the quietness that you feel, and the as I said, it's also paradoxical because you also have these feelings of hope and these feelings of peace, but you can also be in a very big cemetery. One student once said to me, he goes, "I've just walked round and round and round." It wasn't Vimy, it was Maison Blanche, the German cemetery in Neuville-Saint-Va. And he goes, "There are more, Valerie, I don't understand. There are more people buried here than in the town where I live in." And so I think there's also that connection to the space and the place that you have to have time. You have to give yourself some time to actually comprehend it because there's a lot of things going on. It's not just information, facts. There are a lot of feelings. Um, and I think that we need to give people space when they are here for them to feel that, to feel whatever it is that they're feeling, and then for them to be able to come to terms with it. Because for many people, they're face to face with death. They've never been faced with anything so of that magnitude, I guess, before.
Often thought that battlefield guides, particularly those who are taking family members, descendants, or uh, distant family members, even to these places, are fulfilling an interesting role. Because
Mhm.
on one hand, there is the you're conveying facts and the historical facts about what happened. On the other hand, you are interpreting the sites for people because many of them are coming. They may have knowledge, but they aren't sure what exactly they're looking at. But then also, particularly with families, but I think it applies to other pilgrims and visitors, they're looking for something. And
Mhm.
the guide is there's psychological work that's happening, there's, in some cases, spiritual work that's
Yes.
happening, in a way that is different than guides to other types of sites, and that's it that it's a special part of what you as guides are doing. And I wonder, I have to think that you have an interest in the history and you have an interest in the place, and ultimately you have an interest in the people because you're telling the
Yes.
stories. But what is that like as a guide to have some people want to hear you, they think that their relative is a hero or there's a family narrative and they want that reinforced at the site. And so there's a lot of pressure
Mm,
to either confirm or to break the news in some way that maybe this isn't what your family member was doing. And so, what is that like for you to carry this like psychological and kind of spiritual burden
yes.
for people who are looking for deep meaning?
It's a very good question. Um, First of all, I think you have to take it as a privilege, and I think that you have to be very careful um, about how you go about it. So you have to be able to read. In this case, we're talking about family members. You have to be able to read the family members. So I've actually never been in the position where the person thinks that the soldier was a hero, and that I've had to speak differently to that. So that's fortunate. But I have been in the position where they have thought that their family member was, for example, part of the attack on Vimy Ridge, and therefore, to some extent, obviously, yes, a hero. And then only to actually do the research and the archival research for them, and then have to tell them, well, actually, no, he didn't. He didn't participate in the Battle of Vimy Ridge. He was here. He was there, and so I think you have to be very humble about it. I think it's important to tell the truth. I think it's also important to give the visitors or the pilgrims permission to feel whatever it is that they're feeling and to let them look for what they're searching for. And I think the story of heroism is something that you can attribute to any soldier or any nurse or any civilian, anyone who went through the First World War. So whether they won a medal or not, I mean, to me, that's not very important. Obviously, if they won a Victoria Cross, well, there's a whole story that you can go into, or any other type of military distinction. But what about all of the others who also were very brave and who just didn't get it written up in the report? So yeah, I think heroism is easy to speak to. Um, as for the rest, the grief, the sadness, you have to give people the permission to feel it, whatever it is that they're feeling, and you have to give them the permission um, to ask questions. Sometimes maybe they need space. I always give people time to explore on their own, also because it's a very big memorial, and sometimes it's very personal. So sometimes people don't want me or whoever is guiding them beside them the whole time. They want the time to experience the place. And I think that's important to remember.
How did you learn that that was important for people?
Oh, just over time. I mean, I think it's normal. I mean, you cannot be indifferent when, for example, if we're talking about Vimy, you cannot be indifferent when you're in front of a space, a memorial space, an important place of pilgrimage that has 11,285 names around it. You can't be indifferent to that. So it and it's a place that quiets you. And then it's a memorial to more than 60,000 dead altogether. And it's surrounded by a battlefield that, okay, it's not intact anymore because it's 110 years later, but you can still see shell holes and craters and what have you. You can still visit the tunnels. So I don't think I don't think it was hard to, or I don't think it was challenging to have to figure out how to behave. But I'm also a sensitive person. I think guides in this area, I think anybody who's, and you've been here many times, we're all sensitive to these places of huge, immense tragic loss of life. So you drive around and there are 25 cemeteries just outside of Vimy. So um, I'm just going back to repeat what I said before. You can't be indifferent.
Know that all guides are as intuitive, though, as you are describing. I do think that some of the psychological, emotional, to an extent, as I said, spiritual work is
Mm,
overlooked. And I think that there could be more, I don't know about training, more
Mhm.
awareness about this aspect of guiding, in particular, families. But I think it applies to other people as well.
Mhm.
I mean, my first encounter with a war site, so to speak, was the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C., and I was a student, part of a student group, and I had a very different experience than other people in my group who were, it was just another site in Washington, D.C. I
Right.
had a personal connection, to the wall, and I was not prepared, and my teacher wasn't no one was prepared to help me understand and process what I was going through, and so I do think that there could be a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I should write something about this. There could be more awareness around the psychological impact of visiting these places for
Mhm.
pilgrims and visitors.
No, I completely agree with you. I actually have just finished writing a piece on that. It's called
I'd love to hear about it.
it's called Before You Go to Vimy, and it's because I feel like you, despite what I just said, but I do feel that there's a gap sometimes. And so for those people who are coming for the first time, who aren't aware of how they're going to feel, um, it's just a very short, less than 10 pages. It's
Mhm.
not a guide. It's more like an orientation on what to expect, what the site looks like, how large it is, what you can find on it, and of course the emotions that you can feel when you're encountering the different spaces. Um, and also, I think we're going to talk about Vimy House later, but one of the reasons why I have decided to create Vimy House is because I've recognized it for years. And last year when I came home from managing spectator services at the Invictus Games in Vancouver, I found myself with a lot of free time, and I thought, okay, am I going to do what I've always wanted to do? And okay, the time is now. But the thing is that I had identified a gap. So what you're saying is that yes, sometimes people will come and visit, usually when they're in large groups, and they don't necessarily have the time, or they're not given the time, they're not given the permission to experience the place, whether it's Vimy or another First World War site. Um, I'm not going to say properly, but they're not given enough time to experience it fully, perhaps, or they're not given enough time to understand. And when I say understand, it's not the number of dead and the figures around the battle and all of that. It's to understand where they are and what it represents. So that's one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to give people the time to experience things slowly and to experience it outside, walking, cycling, um, being able to ask questions, being able to sit down if they want, and not just go like on a very fast tour of Europe.
I'd love to hear about Vimy House. You've talked
Okay.
about here just very briefly about the impetus for the creation of Vimy House. What is it? What are
Mm.
you doing with this?
Okay. So, well, actually, for years I've run a nonprofit organization, Le Coquelicot Following the Footsteps. But for years I've also worked in international sports, and I've taught. I've had very many hats since I moved to France. Um, and you know, living where I live at the foot of Vimy Ridge, I feel like there's a responsibility to share and to share my knowledge with care and attention. And so I decided to create, well, I like to call it a space, but it's not just a space. So I guess it's experiences. So experiences for people coming on pilgrimages, or perhaps they're not coming on a pilgrimage, but who would like to visit this area and to learn more about it. But I'd like them to be able to do it in a smaller, more attentive way. So I've designed electric bicycle experiences for groups of not more than 4 people. Um, a walking tour that's called Vimy Voices. I'd like people to know a little bit more about the memorial itself because it doesn't get a lot of gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't get a lot of explanations. So how it was built, why it was built, how long it took, who did it, what it represents, how do you read it, and then something that is really important to me is to help people to read the landscapes. So what because they come in front of it and they're shocked sometimes. So what happened here? How do local people live with this every day? What is there? I'd like to share the French experience with the Canadian or the American or British or whoever uh, the perspectives. I think it's really interesting to share how people see and feel and experience things differently. And for sometimes for a Canadian coming to Vimy and they see, say it's a Sunday morning, and they see 30 Frenchmen coming through in their bicycle club and and it's shocking to them, but it's not shocking in the sense that that's how people also need to live, and that's how we need to take care of these spaces, and they need to become places where we can um, sustain the future, where we can live together, and where they can become breathable landscapes and not just places where we weep and mourn. There's this idea of balance.
So with the experiences that you're creating,
Mm.
do you accompany people in this experience, or how if I am sitting I'm sitting in New Hampshire and I decide I would like to participate in a Vimy House experience, what does that look like for me?
You mean how do you go about it?
Yes.
Um, well, there is a website, vimyhouse.fr. And on the website, you can choose your experience. So there are experiences that I have cultivated. So there's a walking tour, for example. And then there are three types of bicycle tours. There are also family pilgrimages. And there is also an opportunity to experience the landscape in an open air vintage vehicle. Because I think also it's important to bring a bit of pleasure into the experience because it is so heavy.
Mhm.
What I find is that if it's a full day experience, I find that people by lunchtime, they really do need a break from the
Mhm.
emotion. And so I did want to bring into this notion of well being or of pleasure, hence the open air vehicle, but also the bicycles, because the areas are beautiful despite being ravaged by landscape, but beside being ravaged landscapes. Um, and there's this notion of well-being as well, and we experience things differently as well if we're walking, if we're cycling, as opposed to being in a big group or
Mhm.
in a vehicle. So that's that idea there. So you can just book online, and then I do custom experiences. So people just need to request.
It I appreciate what you've said about also including the local perspective. Oftentimes, I think we can, as travelers or pilgrims, get caught up in our own perspective and sort of not exploit the sites, but kind of come in and leave, and there's not a lot of local engagement. And part of it is because there's a linguistic barrier in some cases. And it's been my experience with the local people around these sites that they're very invested. They
Hmm.
care very deeply. They often have family members who were also killed in the war or wars, and I would like to see more interaction.
For sure.
I think it enhances everyone's experience. It's so important to engage with people about
Hmm.
the different types of familial experiences around the same era. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I love this idea, with your focus on hearing the French local perspective, in addition to the historical perspectives and the military, part of this, but you're right, French people are living in landscapes of war, and that is a very different way of living than most people in the United States or Canada. And so I think that aspect has been kind of overshadowed a bit by
Mm.
the idea that we travel somewhere and then we come home.
Yes, yes, of course. And we are here every day.
Yes.
Most definitely. But there's definitely a lot of community engagement. There was so much during the centenary of the First World War. For example, talking about how getting people to connect. We had a program through the Coquelicot with students from Memorial University in Newfoundland who came over, and we operated a Canadian clubhouse where people could come and they could have a cup of coffee, they could chat with the locals. We had community initiatives with these students. We had French students working with them side by side. So it was really quite lovely. We had a homestay program. So those things, the homestay program still exists. Unfortunately, COVID uh, was a this big disruptor in
Mhm.
a lot of that. But we do have a program that you might be interested in learning about that is being created right now. So along the ridge, along Vimy Ridge, so 6 kilometers long, there are several different municipalities. So they vary in size. Some are villages, some of them are towns. And with Le Coquelicot following their footsteps, of which I'm
Mhm.
still director, we are developing a trail system. So the trail system is called Le Chemin des Braves, or the Four Divisions Trail, for the four divisions of the Canadian Expeditionary Force who fought in Vimy Ridge of April 1917. And the idea is to have an interconnected trail system that follows each of the divisions from their starting point where possible, because it's not always possible in 2026 to have the
Mhm.
exact routes, um,
Yes.
but to their objective. And so the trails vary in size, but they're all like pedestrian trails or cycling trails. We've tried to use footpaths and cycling trails that exist already. And so they're going to be, it's a project in conjunction with Veterans Affairs Canada, so Le Coquelicot following the footsteps, and then the villages and towns of Farbu, Givenchy-en-Goël, Neuville-Saint-Va, Vimy, Tellu, and Souchet. And if you ever look at a map of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, you see that the four divisions were side by side
Mhm.
along the ridge. And so those four divisions are in those are where those towns and villages are. And so the idea is that you'll be able to start and walk or cycle to the objective, and there will be signage and interpretive panels that will guide you along the way. And the signage will be the colors of the four divisions, so you'll know which division you're following. And if you want to
Fantastic.
start with the first and end with the third, for example, you'll be able to do that. So we have now designed the trails, and we're in the process of deciding what kind of paneling and equipment we're going to be using, and then we hope to inaugurate them next year. So it would be a great opportunity for the 110th anniversary to have foreign visitors, obviously Canadians, come together with the French to celebrate and inaugurate these paths together. And it's all sustainable. It's outdoors. It's in
That
beautiful
sounds
forests and
fantastic.
fields and mm,
And
yeah.
6 kilometers is doable in someone could easily add this to, a one-day itinerary,
Yeah,
to
so depending on where you start, some of them are longer than others, but
okay.
yes, most of the if you just do one division, most of the trails are under 2 hours. So definitely doable in a day, and especially you who are so interested in pilgrimages and your audience,
Mhm.
it's a great way to be able to if you know that your great uncle was in the first division, well now you'll be able to follow the footsteps of the first division. So it's quite lovely, and it's very, very close to the hearts of all of these mayors when you're talking about how devoted and
Yes, I love it.
invested they are. Mm,
Yes. Well, it brings people into their communities also,
mm.
and
Yes.
there's a benefit for the municipalities, to have visitors and pilgrims and travelers coming through their communities while also, maintaining an important part of their heritage and history.
Mm. Yes, because
I
it is a shared heritage.
Yes,
So it's not only for
that's right.
Canadian visitors, it's also for local people who perhaps go take these trails with their dog every day, but don't
Yes.
necessarily know that they're following the third division, for example.
With all of these initiatives that you are a part of, do you have a sense that they integrate together, in some way? And if you could say like what that theme is. I mean, I've heard you talk about remembrance. What is how do they all intersect? What is
I
it?
don't know. I just do it. I think I feel a call. I grew up in British Columbia in a small town. My family's from North Vancouver. Um, like I said earlier, my family served in both World Wars. Um, and I found myself living at the foot of Vimy Ridge in a tiny little village that I had never heard about when I was growing up. And and honestly, I didn't know much about Vimy Ridge when I was growing up. And I feel a sense of purpose and engagement and a desire to share and educate. I think of all the hats I've worn, I think the one that's probably the most appropriate is educator.
Hmm.
So what how does it all connect together? I guess through the word must be education, and then education and sharing. I think sharing knowledge, sharing
Yeah,
experiences, sharing cultures, sharing languages. Um,
it
we're
sounds
all
very
human.
connecting.
Yeah.
I It sounds like pilgrimage. I mean, I could easily say all of these threads are about pilgrimage, but that's just me like imposing imposing my worldview onto what you're doing. But yeah, it really does seem like you're connecting people
Mm,
together and to
connecting.
history and to their families, to the local culture and the local history. W What inspires you about the future? I mean, if you could
Mm.
see all of these pieces continuing to, flow together, where do you see the future?
Where do I see the future? I'm not sure, but where
I
does
should
it?
have that
I think.
sounded a bit sort of,
Mm.
yeah, like sort of, give me a prophecy. I'm looking into the crystal. Yeah. But, how does all of this keep going for you? What inspires you, about where all of these threads can go?
I think there's so much work to be done, Heather. There really is. When I think about when I first moved here and now, so much has happened, but I think there's still so much more. For example, the Four Divisions Trail. It's just an example.
Mhm.
I think there are wonderful educational opportunities, perhaps with Canadian universities. I think that we have to think about also, we're in 2026. How do we engage younger audiences? How do we engage um, people who don't have any family connection to the First World War, perhaps? How do we engage people who think, oh, that's like 110 years ago? I'm more interested in this or that, whatever it is. So I think that we have to think about how do we commemorate? How do we remember? How do we go on pilgrimages? And we have to find new ways of doing it. So, how do we engage with the landscape? How do we engage with the locals? How do we engage in the way that we share and learn and teach our history? Um, and let people have different ways of doing it. Why not have artist workshops? I'm working on um, an event, for example, in June, like a sort of art in the park. Why not have research programs? Um, I think that and then obviously there's a lot more guiding that can go on. There still isn't a lot of, there aren't a lot of services in the area, you know? And I think that for a long time that was perhaps um, wished, or but now the region is developing more. I think there are a lot of opportunities for um, new businesses to be created, new ways for people to engage. For example, um, something as simple as a coffee shop, and then you sit and you have your coffee and you talk with the local person and you gain their experience. And so it's a shared experience. It's not just a transactional experience. So, and people do things here with a lot of heart.
That's true.
So, so I think that those opportunities are things that perhaps we can think about for the future. Um, but the world is a small place now. So,
It is. And I even think about small tools like AI headsets that can
yes.
translate. People can actually very, very soon have a conversation in the linguistic barrier isn't so great, where
Hmm.
people can hear and then, talk and hear and communicate together, and having conversations in a coffee shop can actually happen with the help. I think it's a wonderful, uh,
Hmm.
in this case, AI is a wonderful tool to be able
Sure,
to
for
connect
sure.
people in
And even
ways
along
that
the
we
trail.
wouldn't be able to do,
Yeah. For
previous to
sure.
this point.
I'm sorry I cut you off, but I was just saying, even along the trail or any site really, you can have virtual reality now, and you can see what it looked like, 110 years later, or you can,
Yes.
and then of course there's a lot of focus now also on different types of history, different types of lenses, different, not just focusing on soldiers, but also focusing on different the different sectors of society who lived through the First World War as well. So yeah, then it's limitless.
It is
The
limitless.
possibilities are limitless.
Yes. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share about your experiences personally and professionally, and the talking about the ways that you connect people to themselves and to other people and to the landscape and to history is really inspiring.
Oh,
And
thank you.
uh, I look forward to hearing about Vimy House and how it evolves and the trails, and I can't wait to get back to northern France and actually walk some of these trails. They sound wonderful. And thank you. Yeah, thank you again for sharing about all of this.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and I look forward to welcoming you to the area in May.
Yes, thank you.